Before the confession that stunned the country, Judge Raymond Holt was considered the most disciplined man in Briarwood County. He ruled with calm precision. He demanded order, and he believed in consequences above everything else. But consequences have a way of circling back. It began 3 months before his courtroom confession, with a murder that shouldn't have been complicated. On a fog-heavy night in early September, police found the body of Michael Landon, a 42-year-old business owner behind an abandoned gas station. One gunshot to the head. No signs of struggle, no witnesses. Detective Sarah Collins took the case. Sharp, methodical, and one of the few officers Holt actually respected. Her early findings were thin: a boot print, cigarette ash, and a torn receipt from a hardware store. No security footage, no reliable leads. Then, 2 days later, a witness came forward claiming he saw a man running from the scene. Noah West, a drifter with a minor criminal record and no alibi. It was enough for the DA to file charges. Noah barely spoke during his first interview. He kept repeating one line: "I didn't do this." Judge Holt was assigned to the case. And for reasons no one understood, he moved faster than he ever had before, signing warrants within hours, authorizing searches with minimal review, scheduling hearings without delay. Detective Collins questioned the pace. "Judge Holt is pushing this harder than the DA," she told her partner quietly. The partner replied, "Maybe he wants this one closed fast." During the first pretrial hearing, Noah West stood shackled beside his public defender while the prosecution laid out its thin stack of circumstantial evidence. Judge Holt listened with an intensity that felt more like personal investment than judicial duty. When Noah spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I wasn't there. I swear, I was miles away." Holt interrupted. "Mr. West, this is not the time for speeches." Collins noticed the reaction. The judge's knuckles tightening on the bench, jaw clenching at certain details, especially when the defense hinted the murder might involve someone else. It wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about control. That night, Holt sat alone in his study, courtroom files spread across the desk. He ran his hand over an old wooden box he kept locked, a box he hadn't opened in more than 20 years. Inside were documents, photos, and a police report from the year no one in Briarwood talked about anymore. The year he committed a crime. The year everything changed. He stared at the box, breathing hard. Noah West wasn't the criminal he feared. He was the reminder. The reminder of the man Holt had once been, and the man he'd spent 21 years burying. Across town, Detective Collins reviewed the hardware store receipt linked to the murder scene. The timestamp didn't match Noah's location, and the store manager recognized the handwriting on the signature line. But it wasn't Noah's. It was someone else's, someone older, someone deliberate. A name that made her stop, heart pounding. Raymond Holt. She didn't know why his name was on the receipt. She didn't know what he'd bought that night. But it was the first real crack she'd seen in the case. And cracks, once they start appearing, rarely stop. Before a judge is forced to sentence himself, the truth begins with small fractures. Detective Sarah Collins didn't like coincidences, especially not when they appeared in homicide files. Judge Holt's name on a hardware store receipt connected to a murder scene was more than a coincidence, it was a warning flag. But she didn't rush. She never rushed. That night, she returned to the evidence board in her office. She pinned the receipt beside the boot print photo and stared at the timeline. Noah West claimed he was nowhere near the gas station. The hardware store receipt was time-stamped the same evening Michael Landon was killed, and the signature on that receipt wasn't Noah's. She pulled up the judge's public schedule from that day. Courthouse docket until 4:15 p.m., chamber meetings until 6, a charity dinner at 7. The receipt was time-stamped 8:42 p.m. Not impossible, but strange, very strange for a judge to be buying hardware hours before a homicide he'd soon preside over. Collins reached for her phone but stopped. Calling the DA with a theory involving a sitting judge was not a move she'd survive. Instead, she called the hardware store. A young cashier answered. "This is Detective Collins. I'm looking into a transaction from last month. Do you recall a man named Raymond Holt coming in around 8:42? The cashier paused. "I don't know about the name, but I remember the guy. Older, tall, looked like he belonged in a suit. He bought tarps and gloves, didn't say much." Tarps, gloves, a judge buying cleanup supplies hours before a murder. The details churned in her mind. "What kind of gloves?" she asked. "Nitrile, the thick kind, black." She wrote it down. When she hung up, her stomach sank. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Across town, Judge Holt sat alone in his kitchen, the wooden box still open. He stared at a faded newspaper clipping inside, an article about a young man killed 21 years earlier. No arrests, no suspects, a case that quietly disappeared. His hands shook as he pulled out a photo. Two men standing together outside a college dorm, smiling awkwardly. One was Holt, the other was the man who had died that night. His best friend, his biggest regret, his deepest secret. And now another innocent man, Noah West, was about to be swallowed by a lie that had started long before this trial. Holt closed the box and locked it again. He had spent 21 years covering his tracks, 21 years convincing himself that one mistake didn't define a life. But this new case was dragging his past into the open. At the precinct, Collins dug deeper. She pulled Holt's old property records, including storage unit rentals and past addresses. One unit caught her eye, an abandoned rental from 15 years ago, still under Holt's name, never officially closed. She drove there before sunrise. Inside the dusty unit, she found a rusted metal shelving unit, some old toolboxes, and a locked steel container. She pried it open. Inside were a hammer, a blood-stained tarp, a pair of black gloves, and a police report filed 21 years earlier, with Holt's handwriting in the margins. Her breath caught. This was evidence from another crime, one that had never been solved. She photographed everything, sealed it back carefully, and drove away. If she turned this in through normal channels, Holt would be tipped off immediately. There were too many friendships, too many loyalties inside that courthouse. She needed another way. That evening, she visited Noah West in county jail. He sat behind the glass, pale, exhausted. "Detective Collins, what are you doing here?" "I need to know something," she said. "Did Judge Holt ever speak to you directly?" Noah nodded slowly. "He came to my holding cell before the arraignment. He said," Noah swallowed hard. "He said if I took a plea deal, he'd make sure I didn't get the maximum." Collins leaned forward. "Did he tell you to plead guilty?" Noah whispered. "He said fighting the case would make things worse for me. Like he already knew what the verdict would be." She exhaled sharply. Judge Holt wasn't just rushing the case, he was steering it. Noah pressed a hand to the glass. "Detective, why does he want me to take the fall?" She didn't answer. Because she didn't know. Not yet. But the pieces were forming a pattern. A judge with a buried past, a rushed murder case, evidence pointing where it shouldn't, and a defendant chosen like a placeholder. Before a judge can sentence himself, the truth must corner him, and Sarah Collins had just taken the first step toward doing exactly that. Detective Sarah Collins had handled difficult cases before, but this one felt different. There was a tightness in her chest she couldn't shake, the feeling that she was walking into something bigger than a bad verdict or a rushed investigation. She drove straight from the storage unit to her apartment, locked the door, and spread the photos across her table. 2 crimes, 21 years apart, the same judge, the same pattern of evidence, tarps, gloves, blunt force trauma, and now a new defendant being pushed toward a guilty plea he didn't deserve. But she needed to move carefully. If Judge Holt sensed she was onto him, he'd shut down the case before she could expose anything. She spent the night building a timeline, cross-checking Holt's old records with the details she'd gathered from the new murder. It didn't take long for the pieces to align. At 7:18 a.m., she made a decision that changed everything. She called Assistant Attorney General Mark Irving, a man known for hating corruption more than career suicide. "I need a confidential review," she said. "Not through the county. This goes above Briarwood." Irving listened as she laid out the connections. He didn't interrupt. He didn't doubt. He simply said, "Detective Collins, what you're describing is judicial misconduct on a criminal scale. If this is true, Judge Holt won't let this go quietly." "I know," she replied. "Send me everything. And Collins, keep this off local servers. Don't talk to anyone inside that courthouse." She hung up, knowing she had crossed the point of no return. Meanwhile, in Judge Holt's chamber, Holt stared at Noah West's case file as though it were a bomb he didn't know how to defuse. His hands trembled as he turned each page. He had spent his entire career making sure no one ever reopened the file from 21 years ago, the one hidden in that metal box. Yet Collins had started poking into old storage units. He could feel it. He paced his office, rubbing his temples, replaying memories he tried to erase. His best friend lying on the ground, his own hands covered in blood. The panic, the decision he couldn't undo. He wasn't a monster, at least he didn't think so. He told himself it was an accident, a drunken fight that went too far, a moment of rage that had consumed everything. But guilt doesn't stay buried. It metastasizes into paranoia, control, fear. And this case had pried open the lid. A knock on his door snapped him back. It was his clerk. "Judge Holt, Detective Collins is here. She says she needs 5 minutes of your time." His heart raced. "Send her in," he said. Collins entered with a neutral expression, but Holt could see the calculation in her eyes. "What can I do for you, Detective?" he asked, forcing a calm smile. "I'm reviewing evidence in the Landon case," she said. "Some of it isn't adding up. I wanted to clarify a few details." Holt's jaw tightened. "What kind of details?" She handed him a copy of the hardware store receipt. "Were you at Briarwood Hardware last month?" He stared at it, too long, too visibly. Then he said, "Is there a reason you're asking me this?" "Because the purchase matches items found near the scene," she replied. "And the signature resembles yours." He forced a laugh. "That's absurd, Detective. Anyone could have forged it." Collins watched him closely. "Of course," she said. "I just wanted to hear it from you." She turned to leave, but Holt called after her. "Detective Collins, be careful with your assumptions." She paused. "Is that a warning, Judge?" "It's advice," he replied, but the tension in his voice betrayed him. When she left the office, Holt collapsed into his chair, breathing hard. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. She was following the trail, and he was running out of places to hide. Later that night, Detective Collins's apartment buzzer rang unexpectedly. She checked the camera feed. A hooded figure stood outside the door. Not moving, not knocking again, just watching. Her hand hovered over her holster as she approached the peephole. The man pulled out an envelope, slid it under the door, and disappeared down the hallway before she could even open it. She picked it up and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No handwriting, just a printed sentence. "Stop digging or you'll end up like the first one." She stared at the threat, pulse pounding. Not the second one, not Noah. The first one. The man Holt killed 21 years ago. Collins exhaled shakily. This wasn't just about a wrongful conviction anymore. Someone was willing to kill to keep the judge's secret buried. The deeper Sarah dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a cover-up held together by fear, power, and a judge who had everything to lose. The courthouse felt heavier than usual that morning. Detective Sarah Collins walked through the security doors with a quiet steadiness, carrying a sealed evidence file that could end a career or cost her life. She had spent the last 48 hours sending everything to the Assistant Attorney General, encrypting backups and documenting every threat. If anything happened to her now, the case would still move. She wasn't here to argue. She wasn't here to confront. She was here to witness the end. Inside the courtroom, Judge Holt sat unusually still on the bench, his face drawn, his eyes fixed on the empty defense table. Noah West hadn't been brought in yet, but Holt barely seemed aware of the delay. He looked like a man who had already heard his fate. When the bailiff stepped forward to announce the session, Holt raised a hand. "No proceedings today," he said. The room froze. "I will be making a personal statement for the record." Detective Collins slipped into the back row, keeping her eyes on him. Holt noticed. He gave a small, defeated nod, the kind that told her he had read every page of the evidence she sent to the Attorney General. He knew the walls were closing in. Holt exhaled slowly, then opened a leather folder with trembling hands. "For years," he began, "this court has operated under the belief that justice begins here, that truth is protected here, that the innocent are safe here." His voice cracked, thin and uneven. That has not always been true. A ripple moved through the room. Holt continued. 21 years ago, in a moment of anger, I took a life. I hid it. I shaped a case to bury it. I lived with it every day afterward. And when a new investigation began to mirror the old one, I tried to cover my tracks again. He lifted his eyes, staring straight at Sarah. I failed, and I should have. The clerk beside him looked stunned. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. No one moved. Holt closed the folder. "I hereby enter a judicial confession on the record. Effective immediately, I recuse myself, surrender my robe, and accept full criminal responsibility for the death of Daniel Brooks and the attempted manipulation of the current case." He paused. "I sentence myself to the maximum penalty the law allows." Gasps filled the room. Before anyone could react, Holt removed his robe, folded it with shaking hands, and placed it on the bench. He turned toward the bailiff, wrists forward. "Do your job," he whispered. The bailiff hesitated, then cuffed him. Detective Collins watched silently as Holt was escorted past her. For a brief second, he met her eyes. There was no hatred, no bitterness, just relief. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps. Sirens wailed. The Attorney General's office was already moving. Sarah stepped into the sunlight, feeling the weight lift from her chest. Noah West would be released. The old case would finally be unearthed. Families would get answers they were denied for 2 decades. But the victory felt quiet, almost solemn. Some stories don't end with triumph. Some end with truth finally speaking after years of silence. And for Judge Malcolm Holt, the man who had spent his life handing out sentences to others, justice arrived only when he chose to give one to himself. If you love stories where truth cuts through the darkness, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. More real, raw, and gripping stories are coming your way. Stay tuned.